Let's go to Norman Roule. He's a 34-year veteran of the CIA, a former national intelligence manager for Iran and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, now a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Norman, that's a long introduction. So thank you so much. Listen, I want to start with this plan that President Trump unveiled last night concerning Gaza. It's sparked a lot of outrage around the world. But even if his idea might be flawed or slightly half-baked at this point, it does identify a real problem. The international community shovels money and aid into Gaza, much of which is taken by Hamas to fund its war on Israel. And then the world steps back as Israel defends itself and bombs Hamas in Gaza. And then we all just funnel more money in to help the civilians after the bombing, which is then once again hijacked by Hamas. It's a perverse and awful cycle.
Good evening to you and to your viewers. You're correct. I would add that we also have a series of long-term diplomatic engagements that do not solve the problem. So if we were to look at the president's statement last night, which has received a lot of coverage and some clarification by the White House, there are some very positive elements. We have the United States saying we're engaged in the Middle East. We want a leadership position. We're not going to pay for it. We care about the Palestinian lives. And by the way, I would just say that anybody who jokes about this deal doesn't usually spend any time saying, what do we do with 1.5 million Palestinian men, women, and children who lack homes, sewage, electricity, education, and medical care? And would you have your family live that way for the 5 to 7 years for reconstruction while a militant terrorist group stands around them taking control of the aid?
Yeah.
So the question becomes, it's easy to say this is a crazy idea or a bad idea, but usually the people who say that consume all the time in the discussion before they're asked, what is your proposal that we just don't repeat the 70 years and leave this population in such despair and leave the Middle East in turmoil with the Israeli-Palestinian issue?
Let's say Trump manages to convince Arab countries to take in these nearly 2 million Palestinians, something, these countries have long refused to do. How do you convince all those Palestinians to leave land that international law says is theirs, land that they've spent generations fighting for?
Well, to be clear, the president didn't say anyone would be forcibly displaced. And you actually have two questions. First, if people decide to leave, how do you convince them to come back? Because there may be people who say, if I go to Jordan or Egypt or elsewhere, I'm rather comfortable here and I'm planning on living here. And so there's a question of, it's not just moving the people in and out, but convincing them to return. And the best way to do that for the international community is to create some sort of economic, social architecture where people say, this is hope, this is my future. And that also allow the Palestinian Authority an economy upon which it can thrive and create a two-state solution.
Yeah, but explain why countries like Egypt and Jordan have been so reluctant, have refused for so long. Both these countries support the Palestinian cause, and yet they're like, no thanks, we don't want the Palestinians here. Why is that?
Absolutely. And I would also note that although these are strong partners of the United States and good friends of the United States, much of the complaints about the living conditions of Palestinians during the war have been somewhat muted now that it's become a political problem. But if you're these countries, there are some real challenges. First, if they take them into their countries, this is for years. Who's paying for that? In 6 months, will the international community walk away and leave them stuck with refugees? That has happened before. Next, the Palestinian militants, even if disarmed, become militants in their country. In Jordan, that became the Black September crisis of 1970. And this is a situation where not only can these people create instability in their own countries, we're going to decide to attack Israel from those countries. Last, their economic competition in that country for their own population. There are serious difficulties with this issue. But again, what's the alternative besides leaving these people to sit for 5 to 7 years in rubble and traumatize a generation of Palestinians?
There are no easy answers to a very thorny and difficult
That's the Middle
problem.
East.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.